the manifesto and the ANC resolution, like keeping the SOEs under the state control and expropriation of land. Working with the student movement, the meeting congratulated SASCO for convening a successful national congress. We are calling on COSA's members to prioritize unity and put the interests of the organization first. We are also concerned with the state of the progressive student movement and the youth formation, and going forward we plan to increase our cooperation and support for these organizations. On retrenchments, the CEC expressed concerns about the ongoing jobs bloodbath and resolved to continue to intensify the fight against the increasingly hostile employers. Workers continue to feel the sting of an economic decline and resultant job losses. As the private sector continues to reject a moratorium on retrenchment or cap of the executive salaries, the employers are undermining collective bargaining and retrenching because they are following in its footsteps of government. The private sector decision to renege on the Jobs and Enforcement Summit is a reminder that this is a crisis, or that this crisis is for workers and the poor, but the private sector is doing fine. Yesterday's budget was meant to pacify big businesses, as they are unlikely to change their attitude because there is no reason for them to do so. We'll continue to work hard and use all available platforms, including Section 77 notice, to fight against retrenchments. On unions and recruitment, the meeting took note of the progress that our affiliated union SAMU has made in rebuilding international capacity and achieving unity. This is a welcome development that will ensure that workers in the local government sector have a solid home and a formidable champion that will defend their rights and pursue their aspiration. The CEC also acknowledged the success of our recruitment process that has generated a 30,000 growth in membership. We have also received a number of applications from unions that want to affiliate to the Federation and will process them following a proper processes. On the compensation fund, the CEC is disturbed that there are problems within the compensation fund, and we are also disturbed by the failure of the fund to communicate with relevant stakeholders on what is happening within the compensation fund. The Federation has written to the compensation fund and demanded that the board meeting plan for the 11th of March should clarify these systematic issues and resolve them speedily. On Cosatu ESCOM proposal, the CEC received a progress report on the work done to engage with the social partners on the Federation proposal for an intervention package to save ESCOM. This intervention will be based upon a social compact of government, business, labor, and community. The proposal will see each social partner contributing for a broader public good. This is the first step on ensuring that workers dictate how and where their pension funds are invested. This proposal is also in line with our resolution adopted in the 8th National Congress that called for a federation to ensure that an appropriate mandate is set for investment managers and that workers' funds are used to promote the broader goals of development and decent work rather than a narrow interest of fund managers. The meeting resolved to expedite this work and also convene an economic workshop with progressive thinkers to take this work forward. Sorry for that. On government employees housing scheme, the CEC resolved to uncompromisingly push for the development of the government employees housing scheme, tapping into the workers' retirement savings. Retirement savings are the biggest institution of social ownership which is why the Federation is campaigning for the introduction of prescribed assets requirement legislation, compelling retirement funds and the life insurance industry to channel a prescribed portion of their investment into social investment. Workers' retirement savings should benefit workers and the economy. The Federation also wants government to address the issue of the missing middle by providing bursaries for those students who do not qualify for the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. On the national minimum wage, Cosatu condemns the National Minimum Wage Commission for implementing a partly 3.8% increase in the national minimum wage. Inflation is decimating the wages of the working class families and are dealing with the electricity, fuel, and other hikes that are far above the 3.8 increase. By only adjusting the national minimum wage for 3.8% and not the 12.5%, the Commission has failed to meet its legal and moral obligations. The CEC calls on the Commission to begin its work for assessing the impact of the national minimum wage and to ensure that the national minimum wage receive a substantial increase in 2021 and that farm, domestic and public workers program are pushed to 100% of the national minimum wage by 1st January 2021. On the public transport system, the CEC expresses disappointment with the pedestrian approach adopted by government when it comes to the sorting out of the messed up public transport system, PRASA in particular. PRASA is sabotaging workers because they are losing wages and jobs as a result of PRASA ineptitude. We welcome the investment of 1.4 billion rand in modernizing PRASA rail network, but that is not enough. Cosatu continues to call for an integrated, safe, reliable and affordable public transport system for the country. The attainment of this requires investment in the transport infrastructure. The apartheid legacy and its partial development in particular left the majority of the working people and their families without good public transport system. We still argue the government decision to opt for a market solution to the public transport problem in the country was a big mistake. The establishment of SANRAL within the Department of Transport and the subsequent expansion of the road tolling system has made things worse. We will insist that e-tolls should be abolished and SANRAL should be co-opted back to the Department of Transport. On corruption, the CEC appreciated the work that is being done by the new administration to strengthen the law enforcement agencies and other judiciary institutions. But the meeting expressed concern that there is a little progress when it comes to prosecuting those who are implicated in the corruption. We disagree with the decision to extend the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, and we demand action now. The fight against corruption cannot be won if government continues to adopt this automatic and pedestrian approach. On the gender-based violence, the CEC is troubled by the scourge of gender-based violence and the violence against children. The stories like the one of the 8-year-old who was raped in Cape Town, of a male student who was stabbed by his girlfriend, and of Lindogu Tlekele, who was a victim of hate crime in KZN, remind us of the damage that is being done to our society by senseless violence. The Federation reiterates its commitment to playing a leading role in fighting a scourge of gender-based violence inside the trade union movement, in the workplace and in a broader society. We call on South African government to rectify Convention 190 on ending violence and harassment in the workplace. On the attack on the public services. Cosatu rejects government's narrow fixation with the public service wage bill. We review this provocative budget as a challenge from the National Treasury, and we accept it. Will not allow the workers to be used as a scapegoat for this economic crisis. These cuts directed at the public service will have a severe implication for the economy. Poor regions rely disproportionately on the public service employment, and cutting wages of public servants will intensify poverty and regional inequalities in South Africa. The cut also have severe gender implications because the public service has been an important source of good jobs for women in a labor market which discriminates against women. Women account for a greater proportion of the public servant and a sizable majority of educators. So a cut in wages will reverse the gains that have been made to close the existing gender inequalities. Therefore, budget cuts will only increase geographical inequalities, but will not only, Therefore, budget cuts will not only increase geographical inequalities, but gender inequalities as well. On the alliance, the Cs took a note and acknowledged the progress that is being made to reconfigure the alliance, but understanding that the alliance is based not on sentiment history of our struggle, but on a common program, the meeting expressed concern about some major weaknesses. The scorecard suggests that beyond broader statement on shared objective, the alliance has limited influence on what happens in government. The ongoing public sector dispute and the budget clearly demonstrate this. If the National Democratic Revolution is a struggle primarily led by the working class in alliance with other popular classes, then at the levels of the economy, the working class must be positioned to be the main beneficiary through forms of economic organization that advance its interest. For an example, cooperative ownership and state ownership and the state ownership of the means of production must be vigorously pursued so that the broad-based black economic empowerment take a distinct working class revolutionary character. At the center of class struggle, at the center of the class struggle is the improvement of the socio-economic condition of the working class. At the economic level, within the context of a national democratic revolution and the progressive national democratic state, capital accumulation cannot proceed on the basis of rising rates of exploitation of the working class as it happened since the democratic breakthrough. In order to avoid this phenomenon from happening within the context of the national democratic revolution, new forms of organization need to be invigorated so that they provide a critical dynamic link between the state apparatus and the communities. Without well-functioning alliance structures from the bottom up, the working class risks losing political leadership within these communities, and the movement risks being dislocated from the mass base. On the core priorities for 2020 as identified by the CSC are the follows. 1. Convening of a coordinated popular campaign for jobs and decent livelihoods for all. Convene a national bargaining conference in September to assess overall and transform the bargaining landscape towards the full launch of a living wage campaign. 3. Intensify the NHI campaign. The NHI means quality, accessible, and affordable healthcare for all. 4. Build safe workplace and communities now, end violence against workers, women, and children. 5th one is the fight corruption, ending corruption means more resources for workers' income, community development and service delivery. Heightening the struggle against the climate change and for a just transition that protect jobs, livelihood and environment. 7, wage a fight against the cost of electricity and promote access for the poor and affordable energy. To build a skilled workers or build a skilled worker for the skills revolution, engaging the 4th industrial revolution as the developmental tool for workers, and to convene the workshop on the economic crisis, jobs and alternatives in March as a start towards sustained deeper education on economic strategic questions facing workers and the society. On the international front, the CEC is calling for government and the President Ramaphosa to use the AU chairpersonship to drive the African agenda and make sure that peace prevails and economic cooperation grows in the continent. We also want the Africa Free Trade Agreement to have a social clause that will ensure that decent work agenda is defended and the trade union rights are respected, but also to ensure the question of the country of origin legislation is upheld. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nopala. Colleagues, that was a very short statement of the CEC. Like I said, you already have the copy of the budget statement. So we are going to hand over to you to ask clarification questions. You know the trade. You tell us who you are, and then you ask the questions. We are not going to spend a lot of time. So we are likely to have 2 rounds. Hopefully, if we can have 1 round, that would be very helpful. So we're going to hand over to you.
Okay. Yes. My name is Viewer from Independent. You know, the response by Cosatu and its affiliates and other public sector unions, you know, on the proposal by Treasury to review the 2018 agreement at the PSCBC was very strong. You know, some of the unions saying it's a declaration of war. Some would have described it as very alarmist because it was a proposal, you know, at the first meeting of the PSCBC. Is it because you are anticipating that even though there is a standing agreement which is supposed to be implemented on the 1st of February, are you anticipating that the government may, in any event, go ahead and not actually implement the agreement as it stands? And if that actually does happen, what are your actual plans, you know, other than saying it's a declaration of war? And just last question, you know, there's been a standing concern by government, you know, saying the public wage is bloated. Do you think there's no valid, you know, reason in terms of actually trying to trim it, not necessarily cutting down, you know, on the salaries of workers who are in the public service, you know, who are fit for purpose. But some people would have complained that there are sometimes posts that have no productive contribution, you know, that have to be actually looked at. Some of you as unions have complained that there are even ghost posts there. So are you not being alarmist by just saying we are going to protect, you know, the public wage, instead of saying let's work with government and look at where we can trim it in order for it to do what the government and unions would want, I do.
Thank you.
Covered.
Yes.
Zianda Ngobo from Newsroom Africa. Just following on what my colleague had asked, have you asked for details of what exactly is the problem with the public sector wage bill? Because on the one hand, you'll find that, you know, let's go say, for instance, with nurses, there's a shortage of nurses on the one hand, but you have the minister saying that the public wage bill is bloated. Is it in cabinet? Where exactly is it bloated? Have you asked for those particular details from the minister? When it comes to the ESCOM proposal, it seems as though, and I stand to be corrected, that the Federation has sort of backtracked and saying that it's not just going to be the pensions that are going to be looked at? Please can you clarify on that? And then what is the status of your social compact? These statements, the CEC one and the one on the budget speech, seem to portray a hostile kind of reaction to the budget speech. So will this have an implication for what government and the president is trying to achieve with the social compacts? Are tensions frayed at this stage?
Something also from the SABC here. Chias, can we just get clarity specifically when you speak about, I'll go to this paragraph segment on state-owned enterprises, particularly that the new ESCOM Group CEO, Andre Gareta, speaking about saying that unbundling was bad advice in the first place and they were opting for breaking ESCOM up into various divisions. Since you've got your own rescue plan for the alien power utility, how far does your plan go besides just getting funds to pump into a big hole like ESCOM, which has basically consumed a lot of money over the years but we've not seen productivity coming out of it? How do you then restructure a proposal in a manner that you can also go into the operations functionality of the power utility, such as this new division that has been introduced by Andre Gareta? And then on the issues of the public service wage bill, if I'm not mistaken, it was last year in the budget speech that Minister Tito Mboweni spoke about speaking to those senior public servants who must be persuaded to take early retirement. How far did that process go? And is it now that program maybe have failed, that the minister is introducing that they have some sort of a cap on the public service wage bill? And then on alliance relations, you're saying that it seems as if the Federation and the alliance has minimal influence when it comes to work in government. You had the president addressing you here on Monday at the opening of your CEC. Did you address these issues of you as the labor movement having minimal influence on the economic trajectory of government? And how do you perceive Minister Tito Mboweni performing thus far? Is he listening to you? Is he not? Is he implementing neoliberal policies or not? Thank you.
Robin?
Okay, Ntebo with the SAPC. I've seen on the statement, I've seen the budget on your response to Minister Mboweni's budget. There hasn't been any mention about on the wealth fund. I know that at some point Cosatu proposed the creation of the sovereign wealth fund, but it seems the minister mentioned that in his speech yesterday, where he spoke about recapitalizing the wealth fund by around $2 billion US, or 30 billion to be precise. I know that Cosatu proposed that a long time ago, but there hasn't been anything, there hasn't been any mention about. Do you think this wealth fund will work? And do you think that this is an appropriate time? Because at some point, when you proposed it in the 90s, you were saying that we've got a lot of cash to do that. But it seems now we sort of cash strapped as a country. So do you still support the idea, and do you still think that it is an appropriate time or not an appropriate time? And secondly, on the alliance, you seem to be complaining every time about how the alliance is functioning. Do you think really you're making an impact to steer the alliance politics in the right direction, as opposed to every time after the CEC there's a complaint about either reconfiguring the alliance? It has been a talk for over a decade now. And within the next few months, that's my final question, within the next few months, the ANC will be going to its National General Council. And there's been a number of talk about the meeting being changed into either whether the president should stay or not, although it seems there's an overwhelming voice within the ANC that the president will remain. But as Cosatu and as an alliance partner to the ANC, what are you saying about the unity in the ANC or the unity in the alliance as you go to this National General Council?
Thank you. Thank you.
you. Cheers. On the public sector wage bill, you listed the problems. There's a statement by Nahal which says that the National Union will not enter into any discussion that seeks to take away what the workers have guaranteed for. Does that mean that Cosatu's position is that its public sector unions will not participate in the review of the agreement which was outlined? Secondly, on collective bargaining, you want SOEs to bargain together. Is that what I'm getting there in the statement on the budget? I think I saw it that you guys want a collective bargaining forum for all SOEs. Is that what Cosatu wants? And thirdly, what's the position of Cosatu with the president of the ANC? Because he comes to the CEC and speaks about the public sector wage bill, and you're clearly unhappy with it, but it doesn't seem like Cosatu has any sort of ability to influence the decision of the government. You're taking part in the Medlight forums, and you've outlined in the budget statements all that you've hoped for and how you're disappointed. So, I mean, which victories has Cosatu won through its engagements in the Alliance and Medlight? Because I can't see them there. And then, has the reconfiguration document of the Alliance been adopted by the ANC? Do you know when that will happen? That's it.
I'm still with mine from 2024. Mine is based on the ESCOM proposal. You say you received a progress report in the work done to engage social partners. Can you give us details on that progress report? What methods were they raised? Are there any key issues that were raised by the social partners on this proposal? And is there a time frame on when you intend to wrap up, to submit like a concrete proposal to wrap up this plan? And again, the second one is on your opposition to the extension of the Zonda Commission. Why are you opposed to the extension?
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Zuleko from Bloomberg News. I was just going to take you back to your response to the budget speech and in relation to the public service wage bill. My understanding is that there has been a conversation with the unions and government since the time of the medium-term budget policy statement. And my understanding is that the talks are in relation to sub-inflation increases. Is that something that Cosatu is considering? That's the first thing. And then the other understanding is that the discussions that have been had have been constructive to the effect that even some of the issues that you mentioned here, that you say you are ready to engage government on measures to stabilize the public fiscus, you mentioned reducing bloated executive, etc. Those are issues that have been discussed, and then the National Treasury impact says that these are constructive discussions. How would you actually say those discussions were, in your opinion? And if you are not, in the position to discuss or negotiate sub-inflation increases, how do you then propose you stop the 100 from border with the fiscal cliff?
Thank you. Comrade Leadership.
Thank you very much, Sizwe, and also to the comrades, journalists. I'm going to attempt to respond to few and allow leadership to also take some. Let me start with Zianda. Have we asked what is the where is it bloated? These discussions have been taking place at the level of the PSCPC with the minister concerned. And you would know that Cosatu has always said, we stand by what we have always said, that the public service is not bloated. And if it were bloated, it means the challenges that even the minister spoke about yesterday he would not have mentioned them. He acknowledged the fact that you have less of public servants, you have less nurses, police, teachers, and correctional officers, and doctors. So for us, it is evident of the fact that government understands that there is no bloated public service. So perhaps they may need to tell us where is it bloated, because I think we all agree with them that it is not bloated, at least where service must be delivered. It could be bloated at the management level, and we are waiting for them to then come back to us and say this is where it is bloated. But at least for now, confirmed by the minister yesterday that it is not bloated where service is important to our people. We have shortages of nurses, we have shortages of teachers, shortages of police, shortages of correctional officers in this country, doctors, you name it. Now, can I also link this question with Siviwe on the non-productive post? Mentioned the issue of non-productive post, bloated public service, and this is what Cosatu have been raising for all this time, that there are posts that are not filled. You have freezed vacancies, government. You expect one worker to do a service of 4 or 5 that you have not replaced. People will retire when they retire. But if government wants to bring in early retirement pension, there's a process to do that. What we are not going to accept is when, for an example, what was attempted by the minister yesterday to speak about what is not in his competence. Because you can't bring issues of negotiations when there are processes of collective bargaining into your budget vote and undermine that process and even anticipate that the end result of that process which is underway is going to end with a cut on salary, on wage cuts for public servants. Because you are then giving a message that says, hang on, we are getting this thing under control, we will be cutting wage bill, but there's a process. And the agreement is very clear that if any party wants to review, it has to be in agreement and in writing. So it was irresponsible of the minister to even make mention of a process that he is not part of, because he's not part of the PSCPC processes. There's a minister assigned to that, and you can't undermine that process. Secondly, you can't first acknowledge the fact that you have teachers that are overworked and underpaid, you have nurses that are overworked and underpaid, but still say to them, the crisis that the country is facing, we are expecting you, public servants, to please be our savior and absorb the challenges that the fiscus is facing with. It cannot be fair, particularly when the very same public servants and the workers in this country are saying, let us all work together in turning around the economy of this country and saving the critical SOEs that are important in driving developmental agenda in this country. And you say to them, good enough, we hear you that you want to be part of the intervention to save this economy, but tough enough, we think we must target you. As you are trying to tighten the belt, tighten it further. As you are trying to say, but we can still be prepared to some extent to say we are now engaging in how we're going to be part of a solution to the crisis that the economy is facing, and you still point to them and say, but you are also a problem to the economy. We don't think the government is playing it fair. We don't think the minister is playing it fair towards the public servants in this country. We have always categorized public servants as the missing middle for two things: that their children, out of what they are earning, they can't afford to take them to university and pay for the university tuition and accommodation. They can't qualify for NSFAS because of the bracket of where their parents are. But at the same time, they are a risk to the bank. They do not qualify for the loans in the bank. Now they can't have their own houses. They continue to rent. 2, they can't take their kids to school. And you are also saying, but in much as we acknowledge all of that, but we think we still need to come to you to say, tighten up the belt. The fiscus is in a challenge that is facing, and we think the appropriate way is to appease to the rating agencies, and we're going to make this pronouncement and tell them that to hang on, but we're dealing with the cutting of wages of public servants. We think it's not fair. Now, Cosatu has not backed down on its proposal. We have said in the statement that we are continuously engaging. And remember, we said we are not only talking about pension funds of public servants. We said we want a social compact, a finance vehicle that everyone, business, the private sector, including the provident funds, because workers' deferred wages in this country is not invested for development in the areas where workers reside. It is not invested where workers will benefit. They invest in the stock exchanges, in New York Stock Exchange, JSE, and all elsewhere. But there is no investment that is directly towards the development of the very same workers, be it the provident fund, be it the pension funds. Even where pension funds have been invested, it was not with workers' consent. Now, Cosatu is in a process of further engaging. We've already started. Unions are in a process of engaging continuously with their members on this issue. But we're also saying it is not just public servants who are engaging, both in the private sector and in the public sector. But also we're saying, government, tell us, what are you bringing on? Because the debt of Eskom and the portion that we said must be removed from the debt book is not only going to be financed through workers' monies. And we are happy that the private sector said we are prepared to come along ourselves to help on this. And we are saying all of us, including community constituency, because the leakages that are taking place on electricity in this country, others are through illegal connections. Others are through people adamant not to pay what is due to Eskom. Others are through municipalities not paying and servicing their debts to Eskom and government departments. Now, we are calling on all of that. So we are calling for a social pact, a social compact, that it is not just going to be about money. And Samkelo, our proposal does not only speak about money. Cosatu proposal deals with a number of aspects, and we had hoped that by the time you come to this press conference, you would have familiarized yourselves with our proposal. Because everyone that speaks about Cosatu proposal seems to be focusing on finances. No, that proposal says, before you can even invest so much, these are the things that you need to deal with first. Deal with the restructuring of Eskom. Deal with the capacity of Eskom to generate electricity, but also review the contracts that Eskom has with other coal companies. Deal with the rate that Eskom is buying electricity, but also review this issue of IPPs, that they can't be on their own regulating on how much they're going to sell to the grid. We're further saying, at Eskom, look at the personnel. Is it bloated? And we think the CEO is dealing with that issue at the management level. But if it is, we're not calling for people to lose their employment. We're saying municipalities, with regards to energy, they have a crisis, they may have short personnel. Government cannot say we're dealing with ESCOM, but in isolation with how we are dealing with the broader issues from the local government, provincial government, and national level. So that is why the former statistician general says what Stat South Africa gives as statistics enables the country to have a better planning. So if municipalities have a crisis of electricity generation and engineers and people that have skills, and ESCOM is sitting with a bloated personnel, why are we not redirecting those individuals to go where we lack services? Because you are dealing with the same government that must ensure that communities are receiving proper services, and we have our municipalities being able to generate electricity for our communities and our country. Now, I would really request that we really go and read our proposal, not just what we're saying we think is a social compact, but what is it that must happen before we can even talk about any investment in ESCOM. Restructuring of ESCOM is part of it. We have always asked this question, really is unbundling an answer? And we've always believed that unbundling is not a silver bullet and is not going to bring you solutions to the crisis that you are faced with, because you need to deal with corruption. Because if you unbundle, it does not mean you take away or you deal with the problems that exist in ESCOM. Because to unbundle, you may still remain with the very same people, the same tendencies that are taking place, the same looting that is taking place. Now you need to close the leakages that are taking place inside ESCOM and have an entity that can generate electricity in this country, but there must also be consequences for people that are not doing their work. We can't wake up Samkelo and be told that we're on stage 4. Where are the people that are supposed to be monitoring these things? So, and it also talks about banning of diesel. Why are we not moving from diesel to gas? So our proposal is very, very detailed on the things that we need to deal with. And also further says to have enough energy in this country. We don't want to rely also on the IPPs, and we appreciate that they are only a 5%. But we're saying government must also play a role in entering the space of mixed energy. And that government, we have learned, now we're busy with Section 25. Why can't we expropriate land where we can be able to generate electricity and government be the bigger player in that industry? Okay. Is the president listening to Cosatu? But also let me say that the president, when he addressed the CEC, he did not give us a budget vote. He did not talk about a bloated public wage bill or bloated public service. The president does listen to the federation on some areas. Remember, we say he gets to be contested himself. He's the president of the republic, not the president of Cosatu. He's the president of the republic. So you expect everyone to be meeting with him and saying, this is our interest, this is what we want, this is what we see, and all of that. But we can appreciate that to some extent there are things that we have moved and said to the president, we think this is where we should be going. And we have seen those things taking place. And we appreciate that we may not win everything. But also remember, the challenge is not even with Cosatu. The challenge is also inside the ruling party. And we should not pretend as if we don't appreciate that they are contending views inside the ANC to some extent. So you have a president that must deal with an administration that has inherited these problems, because these problems did not start in his administration, but we're trying to fix it. And what we appreciate also is the willingness of the president, at least in trying to move ahead in dealing with this. And we hope that his cabinet, that's why we said, what we do not appreciate is these many voices that cabinet ministers, you hear this one say, sell SAA, we don't need it. And there's a position of the ANC that says, you are not ready, we are not going to sell SAA. We need to rescue SAA. And you have a minister that crosses over to a different portfolio and speak about this instead of dealing with the issues that are within the portfolio of that minister. And was saying, let the president lead. He must be in charge. He must lead. He's the president elected to lead this country. He must lead his cabinet, but also he must lead his organization. I will allow our the comrades.
No, thanks, President. Just a few areas to cover in terms of the public service. Oh. Okay.
Proceed.
That number one, comrades, we did not only ask for details about what is it meant by public service wage bill and the bloatedness. We even directed them what they must go and look around. And disappointingly, the document they presented a day before yesterday did not cover those areas. Because when you talk about a public service, you're not talking about, or we should not talk about only the workers that are covered by the Public Service Bargaining Council, PSCPC, which are the categories that the President have listed, including cleaners and those security that works in clinics. You must talk about the state-owned entities. You must talk about SANRAL. You must talk about PRASA. You must talk about SASA. You must talk about ESCOM. You must talk about all those that getting their salaries from the same purse and constitute a public service. Because public service is not just the departments of health, the Department of Education and Home Affairs. Public service, in particular when we talk in terms of fiscal terms, it is all those entities that derive their salaries and remuneration from the same pot. Now, to isolate, as they've done now, only those workers that are in the PSCPC is mischievous. It is not giving South Africans the total picture of, number one, how much does it cost to run a public administration, not to pay salaries. What is the sum total that goes into performing a public administration, including the litigations, including the buildings you lease instead of building, including the wastage that goes there. When we talk about public service, we must also talk about municipalities. If you go into the public servants who are working in clinics and hospitals and schools, and you cut their salary and you say you are managing a wage bill, while you are not doing anything to the public servants that are in the local government sphere of the government, you're not telling the truth to South Africans. You're actually attacking a certain category of the public servants. So that's what actually angers the workers, that you're segregating. So there was I think it's Gavin who asked the question about, we see in your statement you are saying in the collective bargaining, you must also include these other entities. One of the problems that we can't manage the wage bill and we are quick to run into the civil servant is because that just too many centers that determine the salaries of public servants. As I've just said, who determine the salary of the public servants who work in Sanral or in SASA? What is the bargaining council that deals with that? You go and attack Resolution 1 of 2018, you leave the rest of the salaries that goes to these CEOs and these boards that are in the public entities. So we are saying, if you want to manage, and they say they want to stabilize, if you want to stabilize the wage bill, bring them under one roof. So when the salary and the wages of the public servant, people who do public duties, are determined under one roof, so that we can track and we can say quantitatively, this is what we mean by a bloated public service, or in fact by a wage bill. All these people who were clapping hands in Parliament yesterday when Minister Tito Mboweni was raising the things he was raising, none of them earned less than 1.2 million per annum. Just to clap hands there. Just clap hands and sleep. None of them, most of them, they don't know what is the price of the petrol. We subsidize their lifestyle. We subsidize their lifestyle. They have an audacity to sit there and take a decision that says, we're going to, this one was ending 10,000, we're going to cut the salary in order for them to continue and earn the money they are getting and clap hands there. So that's one part. So we are saying that they are lacking in details, but more so, the first question was, are we not being alarmist? This country has been founded on the basis of social dialogue, and have established institutions for social dialogue, NEDLEC being one of them, bargaining councils being one of them. The minister must pronounce a settlement that is as a result of a collective agreement reached by social partners. When you have a minister of treasury pronouncing things that must be discussed and agreed upon in the bargaining council, you are undoing and undermining and actually attacking the principle of collective bargaining. And the parties to that process can't allow that. So that's one part that we said is a proposal, yes, but it's a mischievous proposal because the timing of it is 20 days before it was supposed to be implemented. Remember, on the 1st of April, workers in this country knows that they're expecting to get an increase as per the agreement they've signed in 2018. You come just before it's implemented, you say, I'm actually reviewing it. And not only say we are reviewing it, you are even ready, it's already in the budget speech. It must be pronounced tomorrow. You're not giving space for negotiations. Because there was a question that was saying, are you prepared to negotiate? How do you negotiate when tomorrow you give it to me tonight, tomorrow you're going to announce in Parliament? Where must I go and consult? What time must I consult? What time must I prepare my response to your proposal if you are going to pronounce in the budget speech tomorrow? So there's no negotiations. It was not, it's a unilateral implementation and imposition that we can't allow to go ahead. It has never happened even during the apartheid government, by the way, that a signed agreement is reneged on or is just people pull out from it. We don't expect it to come from a democratic government. And lastly, on this point, the government is the biggest employer, is the largest employer, is the custodians of the policies and regulations and laws in this country. They have a responsibility not only to protect or to implement, but they must lead by example. If you do these things that they are doing, what do you expect private sector will do? When the government, the biggest employer, people who make laws and are supposed to defend laws, they go and treat the laws like this. And what do you expect is going to happen in the mining sector, in the retail sector? There's going to be a chaos of employers just doing as they wish because the government have led by example. We can't allow that thing to happen. You asked the question about the pension, the early retirement that was pronounced in the last budget speech, whether it has failed or not. It has failed because the law as it stands doesn't force workers to take an early retirement. The law as it stands now, it says the workers are going to apply to take an early retirement without a penalty, and the executive authority is going to look at those areas and then apply his mind whether to grant or not. So even if you wish as an employer that I must take an early retirement, there's a constitutional mandatory retirement age in this country. If I'm not ready to retire, you're not going to force me. The law doesn't allow you to force me. That's why it has failed. So as long as we have got ministers who think they can break the law, they're going to always end with their eggs on their face, because it's going to happen even on this thing that they are pronouncing now. On the sovereign wealth fund, you say we're not saying anything on our statement. I think Comrade Caesar said that we've given you a separate statement that responds to the budget. We are saying in that statement, the budget is not related to the SONA pronouncement by the president, and we listed them. The president promised to build 3 universities, 7 new colleges, and fast-tracking the national health insurance. He had nothing about that in the budget, and we're saying in that same statement, we are ever welcome the support. And support the progressive pronouncements on the sovereign wealth fund. We're saying so in our response to the budget. It's there in a separate statement. Of course, we are not happy that they say they're going to introduce a bill that is going to deal with the sovereign fund, because a process of a bill can take a period of 3 years. And by that time, we might not have resources from which we must get money to put into a sovereign wealth fund. We would have hoped and wished that this matter is fast-tracked. Like the President said, the proposals on the ESCOM have always been beyond just the pension fund. Just the PIC. It has been all those funds, including government, including the business. But our plan also goes further to compel ESCOM to have a debt recovery plan. What we would have expected yesterday in the budget is that the minister will have said, Department of Public Works, you owe ESCOM 200 million. Well, I allocate you this money, I'm subtracting this money and I'm going to give it to ESCOM. We have expected the minister to say the following municipalities are owing ESCOM. We can't allow government department to owe a state-owned entities and expect it to run function properly. We would have expected him to say, we're taking this money from you as municipality, we're allocating to ESCOM for ESCOM to function properly, and then I'll allocate you the remainder. In order to make sure that there's a deterrent on department spending electricity without... So that's one of the things that we are raising in our plan. On alliance relations, if President was not listening to Cosatu, I'm sure the ESCOM would have been unbundled by now. Because everybody wanted ESCOM to be unbundled. Everybody wanted ESCOM to be privatized. Everybody wanted SA to be sold. And you could hear the voices, there were so many. But because he does listen to Federation sometimes, we are still here today. We're not having those institutions have been sold. And we're not complaining. If you read our statement, because we say we complain every time. When we say the CEC took note and acknowledged the progress that has been made to reconfigure the alliance, it's not a complaint. It's an acknowledgement of the progress that has been made. And we said, but understanding that the alliance is based on this, not only on sentiments and history of the struggle, but on a common program. We are therefore making that process to say, we think we need more programs to come in place because that things, including the dispute that we're having, the alliance needs to check up its influence, particularly on its government. But we're part of the alliance. We are saying we're going to engage these matters there. We're not complaining. We're just stating a fact. We said, back to the bargain. We said we are prepared to Bloomberg. The discussions that have been taking place. The discussion that have been taking place was not aimed at workers accepting that they must cut the wages, particularly moving out of an agreement that is a 3-year agreement, which workers normally don't like. They always like to engage, negotiate on a year-to-year basis. But in the last financial year, you pull out of it. That is actually not acceptable. But the discussion that have been taking place with government was these things that I've raised. We were supposed to get a proposal from government that says, we have heard you, we've quantified, we've got 740 state-owned entities. All of them, they draw their salaries from the public service. We have got municipalities. This is the pay scale of municipalities as compared to the people who work in the Department of Health, for instance. We need to stabilize, and otherwise stabilizing, can we rationalize them? There must be one if we are all working for the public service. And all of them must be determined at the same place. Then we can talk about numbers. That's the discussion we have been pointing out to the government that the problem in the public service and in the declining economy is not the wages of workers. It is the rest of the other things that goes with the administration of the public service. You will know that up until yesterday, they have been saying that public service is bloated. In other words, we are too many. But they said yesterday, since 2011, we have not been filling posts. In other words, the classes are becoming fuller, the clinics are becoming fuller, few nurses are in the public service. It had to take us to show them in terms of numbers, in terms of head counts, in terms of figures, not the rhetoric, that this is what public service constitute. We are going to do the same even on the wage bill. If they are prepared to engage, we're going to do the same. We're going to prove to them that they have misdiagnosed the problem. It is not the wage bill. Thank you, President.
Can I just, so that you don't sometimes get confused. When the Deputy President says we have been engaged in discussions on these issues, he means the bargaining council. not Cosatu to engage in this matter. We're not engaging on the collective bargaining, and we've been refusing to engage on the collective bargaining. We said collective bargaining must be addressed where they belong. So we'll not address the question of wage cut with the president or with the minister in any other forum. Safe to say it must be done in the collective bargaining council. The question that was asked was whether Nihau says this. I think Nihau will speak for itself, but what we understood them to be saying is that when Treasury has taken a decision and say so much will be cut, what is left to negotiate? Because government has taken a decision. Government can't take a decision and say, let's come and negotiate. You don't do that one. You come and say, you've got a proposal to make, you engage in those discussions, then the outcome can be announced in terms of what the decisions are of any negotiation. You don't announce and prejudge what will happen in those negotiations. There's a question about the minister, Tito, and whether his views neoliberal and etc. Cosatu have said, and we are saying it for record, any minister of finance, if the approach is a consecutive one directed by neoliberal policies, he will be announcing them in that way. So whether you take Tito and then you bring another one, that's not necessarily it's going to change. The difference, though, is how the ministers' approach and outlook look like. We have Trevor, who was arrogant. We get Nene, who was very soft. But the policies were still the same. That he will not shout at you, he will not tweet, he will say, I'm listening, I'm prepared to consider. But the outcome in the institution was the same. So it is the government neoliberal policies that we have been attacking in the NDP that they are wrong. They are not going to meet the target. And they are not going to meet the target. Now it become a fact. 2030 is around down the corner. They said they will cut the unemployment to half. Unemployment is growing. But they are sticking to the NDP. Now, just to add on the issues of why then this thing is going in this way, our hope are lying on the reconfiguration of the alliance. Because it must be that alliance that guides government quite correctly. Not that government must lead the ANC, which was our problem with the Treasury document. The ANC is supposed to develop its own economic policy. But they left it to the Treasury. The Treasury did what it did. They adopted. So where is then the ANC? That's why we said they will not be able to tell Tito because they are not coming up with anything in dealing with those issues. On the issues of the Zondo Commission that we said why we don't want it to be extended, it is informed by the narrative that suggests that nothing will happen until the Commission make a recommendation and report, which we disagree with, by the way. Our view is that there are a number of people who have been accused through the Commission. The police must do their work. If people must be arrested. People must be tried. They can't wait for the Commission. Now, waiting for the Commission standing its life, it means the other, state organs in terms of police and the NPA are going to wait. We reject that in our view. They're supposed to be acting. There's enough evidence presented in Zondo Commission, so they must be able to move on. On the question of bundling, ESCOM with what this new CEO is saying, is a saying, as the President has said, exactly what we said. Unbundling is not the solution. clean out the corruption and everything that is wrong in ESCOM, you can then talk about unbundling later. But as there are no reasons provided for why we should go for unbundling. So I think others that we may miss, you may come back to them in dealing with those issues, but we've tried. On the framework, somebody asked where we are with the compact. The framework is about to be finalized, which it means there will be a contribution by everybody, but how much from each has not been decided as yet. It keeps changing. Government must come up, business must come up, and everybody in terms of how much will come from ITC, UIF, compensation, and all those things, and therefore be able to flesh it out, what it look like moving forward. But of now, we're waiting for the framework to be completed. In the next meeting of the Presidential Working Committee, which is on this next Monday, we'll get an update report in terms of the framework and be able to start to look to the details of those issues. But one critical issue is on the framework. While business is opposed to prescribed asset, they are not opposed to what Regulation 28 says, that they must invest at least up to 10% of their investable income. As we speak, they are sitting at 2%. So we're not going to be able to get enough money unless they end up the investment strike, as Ntebo was indicating. We had a meeting with business a week ago. They confirmed that they are investing up to 17%, I'm sorry, when the country need about 27%. So they agree they are in a strike. They are putting their money in the banks and etc. and etc. It is that mentality that we're trying to unlock. But why should business be interested in dealing with those things when they have a minister in terms of treasury who really was giving them what they wanted? No corporate tax, no wealth tax, almost everything has been given to them. Government must give them the infrastructure funding. Government must give them some consultant because the state does not have the capacity. So they are happy with all those issues. They will be smiling all the way to the bank in the name of cutting the wage bill and giving them to do what they think they have to put in. In most of the contract that went wrong in ESCOM is with business. Everywhere. It is not the state-to-state kind of corruption. It's the state with the private sector. They are the beneficiary on this one. One of our agreement in ESCOM is that all the contracts that ESCOM has entered into must be reviewed. They are resisting that one. They said, no, resist them only if they are illegal. And we know most of them will pass the legal test, but they will not be moral. It might be legal that you enter and buy coal 4 times expensive. There will be nothing illegal about it. But it will be immoral that what you could buy them cheaper and affordable, you agree to buy them 3 times the price. So we had an issue with business to engage on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, leadership. I want to believe that this was very comprehensive. I'm shocked that there are still heads. But this is the last round. Govin?
Thank you. Just Govin again from ENCA. Just a point of clarification then, with 20 days until the expected increases were to be paid to the government workers, or with those increases expected in April, where does this leave you legally? Are the Cosatu public sector unions accepting that their members in the public sector won't get those increases? Do you have any legal avenue to follow, or do you expect those increases to be paid despite the review? Well, thank you.
Okay.
And to the GS, sorry, GS. You've said here that the discussion on the wage bill being cut will only happen at the Public Sector Collective Bargaining Council and won't happen as Cosatu speaking to the ANC. Did I get that correctly, sir?
No.
Is Cosatu going to raise the fact that the government wants the wage bill cut with the ANC in a bilateral?
Okay. Is that the only questions?
Yeah. Please, I got time when he's 24. Just a point of clarity to you, Mohamed, with regards to your response about the president. You seem to separate the president from his cabinet, and I'm wondering why. Because you say that, in your statement, you say that the alliance has a limited influence in what happens in government, but yet you demonstrate this confidence and the strong defense for the president. You speak about ministers who are undermining agreements and ministers who cross over to certain portfolios, yet the same ministers, even the Minister of Finance, was sitting with the president, crunching those numbers. So why separate the man from his entire cabinet? I just need you to reconcile that with me. Because, I mean, the budget it's not just a bunch of numbers, it's a policy framework.
From MoneyWeb. I just want an update on the proposals that you guys asked for alternative ways to dealing with ESCOM debt, and this was also supposed to be discussed at the CEC. Have you received a lot of proposals from the public? Have these been discussed, and did these in any way sort of influence how you are relooking your solutions towards dealing with ESCOM state?
Okay. I want to believe that that is all you wanted to ask. Okay. It's fine. We are going to allow you at least 10 minutes for one-on-ones when we are done here.
Too much. Thank you very much. Let me deal with that clarity. We are not, or I am not separating the president from his cabinet. But what we are raising here is that the president must lead. For an example, when the ANC, NEC, took a decision that SAA must be saved, okay, and it must go to business rescue, but it must remain being a majority shareholder, being the government, the state. That process, whilst it is underway, a minister in the cabinet, when business rescue practitioners announce the cutting of routes, for an example, the minister, another minister, says, why save this SAA? There's a decision in the NEC of the ANC that the president is the president of. That the very same cabinet ministers are members of the NEC. There is a cabinet lihutla following an NEC lihutla that does not talk about selling SAA. And then you have a minister who then speaks in a rally and says, why are you keeping SAA? Okay. Now, on cutting off routes, the president, when he was asked, he seemed shocked that there are routes that are now going to be stopped, and maybe it's his reaction, I don't know. Maybe he reconciles later. So he gets shocked that there's a decision made by the business rescue practitioners in cutting. So he does not agree. The minister who is responsible for the state-owned entities, these ones, is not in agreement. Now you have one cabinet minister who says, they're right, they're correct. So what we're calling for is that when the ANC president leads the African National Congress and its NEC, and there are decisions that are taken, you expect members of the NEC of the ANC and members of the ANC to follow suit in implementing those decisions. Secondly, when the president sits with his cabinet and decisions are taken, you don't expect another voice outside what was agreed to. So one is not saying we're separating the president from his cabinet, but when there is a decision by the cabinet, you expect that ministers, let us as South Africans have confidence that when the president addresses us on a particular matter, we are not going to be confused by another minister who speaks completely different from what the president has said. We as South Africans expect that when a particular department speaks, for an example, the issue of cutting off the roots by business practitioners, what is the impact to tourism? Now you're going to have the Minister of Tourism saying, no, I don't agree because it has a direct impact on my portfolio. I was not engaged and all of that. What we're calling for is the president to lead. He is leading cabinet. When there's a decision, we want to hear that a leader has spoken and people are following. He leads the African National Congress. We expect that when the NEC of the ANC has taken decisions, everyone must then follow suit in defense of those decisions and in implementing those decisions. That's what we're calling for. I have no intention of separating one from the other, but we're saying allow the president, and the president must be allowed to lead by his own cabinet. And instead of confusing all of us, and then leads to the president becoming shocked when things are said. Perhaps he has every right to be shocked because it's not what was agreed to. We don't know. We are not in the cabinet. So we don't know what was agreed to. But it does not look good, you know. Thank you.
When a team loses, as the one team will lose on Saturday.
As it has lost.
And when the team loses, spectators point other players that make them to lose. So while they accept that the team lost, but they still say, hey, this player is a problem. When we ask in the previous administrating for one man to go, you remember, was his supervisory kind of stuff in terms of why he allows this and this and this. So while there will be one collective, but there will be also individual, as the president indicated, that really goes astray in the same issues in dealing with those issues. So there will be a time when you got someone and then who listened to you and come back with hands in the air and said, I took this decision and I fully support. I went to the cabinet. The cabinet ruled against me, but I have to accept that decision. So those things do happen. That's why in the ministers there are people who say, we're happy with our minister dealing with it in a particular way. But on the bilaterals that you are asking, are we going to just sit back and do nothing? No, we're not going to do that one. We're going to raise with the ANC but we're not going to be raising in terms of the monies and how much has been cut. We're going to be raising on principles. First, the ANC should be the custodian of the laws that we have. And this attacked by treasurer. And we continue saying treasurer rather than the minister, because we understood the minister when it comes to the bargaining council. He speaks at sometimes differently from the treasurer. We're going to say there's an attack on collective bargaining because that's what we believe it is. There's an attack on multi-year agreement. Because the public sector, if they are being dealt with in this way, will they ever agree to a multi-year agreement? They may not. They will be saying, no, we're going to talk for year to year. When we are doing negotiation in that way, It does not give you the projection, the planning, and the time in dealing with those issues. But undermining any agreement we're going to be raising with the ANC. How can you allow the undermining of an agreement? And we'll be raising in the context that sometimes ministers, they listen in the budget as if they are surprised. You can see them shaking hands when they were said something was going to be increased by 2 rand, the spirit, you should see some other faces like, oh God, we're surprised. But they are, mostly they are acting to make it genuine in dealing with those issues. We're hearing it for the first time. No, they are being asked to make presentation to the treasurer before. And sometimes they make strong recommendation when the treasurer give them feedback. So we're going can't escape that. Can't escape that kind of an arrangement. On the issues of the advert of getting suggestions, I think somebody asked these things. We got them. We got a bundle. What was it we intended? That's why we put the deadline on Thursday before the CC start on Monday. But we have been overwhelmed by the submission. So we got a document as thick as this on submission in terms of how ESCOM can be safe or how other SOEs can be safe in dealing with those particular issues. Now we're in a process of trying to analyze them to get a sense what they say. We know from the previous 2 weeks, there have been those who have been negative without sometimes coming with any other suggestion. There have been those that have been positive. There have been those that are in between that says will support or it can work only if you attend to the following issue. So we're going to be in the processes of analyzing them and be able, as we continue with the framework, to be able to take a concrete suggestions. But we have been always saying that if there are people who got other better ideas, Cosatu will be the first to accept them. But there are principles. We must save ESCOM. It can't fail. It cannot be privatized. It must make affordable electricity and the pricing and etc. So there are a number of those conditions that we are putting in place. But we have received them. We're analyzing them moving forward.
Okay, Gavin, the 20 days and the implementation in the 1st of April, what usually happens when we've got a multi-year agreement? From the 2nd year to the last year of the agreement, there will be a special sitting of the bargaining council, because the agreement will say, for instance, the one that we have now, that on year 3, which is this year, workers from level 1 to level 7 will receive CPI plus so much increase, and it goes down. Now the council must sit and ring fence and determine the cutoff in terms of the CPI, to say, now that it's March, on the 2nd or on the 3rd, this is what the CPI is. And we're ring fencing it, no more or less, no more above that. And this, we're now putting a 1% on top of the CPI or 0.5%. And that determines whether that year the increase will be 5% or 6% or 4% because of that. That needs to happen in time so that departments get the memo to load them into their budget so that it can start to run in the system, in the PESA system. So that by the end of March, it must already be reflecting on the system that it is going to be budgeted for and it's running on the 1st of April, it's kicked in. You know that in the normal negotiations, when the employer or the labor present proposals, you have got 21 days to consult your constituencies to come back and say, this is our response. These ones did not even give 21 days for labor to even consult the constituency. They were presenting today, tomorrow they were supposed to pronounce. Now, it is that 20 days I'm talking about. That it's supposed to happen in March, at the beginning of March, or in fact the special sitting that said day before yesterday was supposed to be dealing with that fact of determining where the CPI is and how much is going, so that it is communicated to the members and so people can start to know and budget. So your second question is, So will they implement or will they do not implement? We expect them to implement because Labour will not be agreeable to the revision. And if there's no revision, it means the agreement stands. And if it's not implemented, the Labour is going to apply for enforcement because it's a legal document. All we are saying is that there's no trade union movement worth of its salt will sit across the table with the employer discussing a downward variation of the rights and benefits that workers have. You can discuss other things, not to reverse that which you have. So that's what we are saying. So I think what the General Secretary was emphasizing, that we're not discussing matters of bargaining outside the bargaining council. That's what we're saying, that we're not going to take to the president, we're not going to anybody. The matters that must go to the bargaining must go to the bargaining council. But of course, the ANC fought for democratization of the workplace in this country. The ANC fought for giving the voice to the workers to bargain for what they think they are worth. And we will be saying to the ANC, you can't have a government that undo that which you fought for as a liberation movement. That's what we're going to be raising. That they didn't fight for workers to be exploited and be undermined like this. They didn't create institutions for people to come and then trample over them just like that. They can't be quiet and not do anything. Otherwise, like we said somewhere in our statement, they must think twice about the relations with the workers in this country. Thanks.
Thank you, leadership, and thank you, colleagues. We appreciate your attendance today, and we also want to remind you that we do have forms available. You can join the Communication Workers Union, and those that want to have one-on-one meetings, the leadership is available. Thank you.
A reactionary like you will never be elected.